in the industry back in '97. Left it for a little while to do a stint with what was Sport Southland back in the day for 3 years, and then jumped back in when the manager's job opened up. My background was, when I initially got into the industry, much like Steve, I actually started off lifeguarding. I tested a lady named Jan Cameron, who was the coach for North Shore Swimming Club, and after a while she turned around and said, well, you may as well coach, so I kind of went into the coaching side. From there I thought, well, I really want to learn about water treatment, so I threw myself into water treatment, then into learn to swim, and then went through management from there. So been in the industry, worked in a lot of pools, worked with a lot of different filtration systems, from gravity sand fed filters, which is pretty much where you just let water go over the top and let it filter through the sand, right through to what we have now, which is vacuum DE and pressure DE systems. So I've been lucky enough to work with quite a varied array of filtering systems and different plants. I'm also a skills active assessor. I'm also a lifeguard trainer as well. I'm also a AusSwim presenter, so I train up swimming instructors, as unfortunately Lumsden know, quite regularly out there assessing assessors and doing trainings out there. So likewise, I'll run through this. If you have questions, quite happy to answer them as we go. Otherwise, leave it to the end and we can run through any questions you've got there. And I know the first thing that's probably running through your head is thinking that we've got a much bigger budget than what you do to run our council pools. Yes, that's correct, but we also have to go through the same processes that you do for a community pool. So if I decide I want to do something, I can't just go, right, let's get some extra cash and make that happen, because we do have limited budgets as well. So, like you do, you have to have planning in place. You have to know what you want to do, when you want to do it, when can you do it, what it's going to cost. So I thought, right, how am I going to run through this and try and come up with a way to sort of summarise how I've worked through things over my years, how I've come up with plans and what I've put in place. So where to start? I guess the first thing to realise is I manage a pool, but the reality is I'm a custodian of the pool for the next generation. So I'm merely looking after an asset that the community own for the next person to pick up and run with. So every time I'm looking at doing something, I want to be thinking about future-proofing, and future-proofing for 30 years plus down the line. And I know that's hard as a volunteer when you're thinking, well, I'm only in it for a short period of time possibly, but that's the best reason to put your mark on it. So when I left Nelson, I had a 30-year plan in place for the pools that I managed in Nelson. That plan is about halfway through. My friends in Nelson tell me what's happening. I'm like, yeah, cool, that plan's still going ahead. So I know the plan that I put in place many, many years ago before I left is still being actioned now and being added to. So it's about creating a bit of a pathway for everyone else to follow. So there's 5 areas that I want to talk about. One is thinking about critical spares and what they might be, what they are. The next thing I'd like to get into is thinking about the plant asset side, the asset management side of it. What does that look like? Then I want to talk about the planning side. How do I actually sit down? How do I make a plan for that long term? You know, how do I think further than just a year ahead or a season ahead or a couple of seasons ahead? Maintenance timing, always a big issue. It's already been brought up about how you've got farmers on these groups, these trusts. So actually, how do we get the timing of implementing these in between every other activity that's happening there as well? And then the big one, budgeting. We all have issues with budgeting. Even for Steve and myself, I'd love to have twice as much in my budget as what I've got to be able to do a lot more around the place. And when I have kids turn up going, when you're putting hydro slides in, I go, I don't have Steve's budget to do that. So critical spares. What's a critical spare? what do you think a critical spare is in your plant or in your operation of your facility? Any ideas?
Something you might need at the last
Everything that
minute
works.
to run it.
Cool. So for me, it's a piece of equipment that can fail, that you need to be prepared to be able to replace quickly to maintain operation or create the least amount of impact on the operation of your facility. We're under the pressure all the time that any time a pump goes out or any time we have to close a pool, we're answerable for that. So every year at council we get audited, and they go through our Facebook to see how many days we've closed a pool or what we've closed a pool for, how many hours it's been shut down, why was it shut down, how long did it take you to repair it. So that's the pressure we're under running our pools as a council. So critical spares for me is kind of high on my priority list. And I guess when you're running a pool for the trust as well, you've also got pressures on you. May not be auditors, but how many parents do you go, summertime, we want to get our kids to the pool. Teachers go, well, hold on, today was lesson day, we want to get in there.
Oh, it's those morning lap swimmers, they're the ones who
Oh, yeah.
Not getting there
Tell me
either.
about it, we're doing maintenance at the moment, we hear every day, when are you open?
Yeah.
We told you when. So you need to think about what things can you put in place to hopefully either have close by, on hand, that you can put in, replace it straight away, keep open straight away. So the best thing to do is to make a list of what keeps your pool running. Just a plain piece of paper, start from one end of where your water goes out of the pool, through the filter system, where it goes back. That's the easy part, making that list. You know, thinking of your pumps, thinking of your dosing systems, thinking of your overflows. All those sorts of things, the filter systems you've got. Having a bit of an understanding of what they are, and if you're unsure, I'm pretty sure Steve and myself are quite happy to be on the end of the phone, come out, have a look around, run you through and talk through it. I think something that was mentioned in the break was, at the end of the day, Steve and I aren't salesmen. We're not here to try and sell you a product. So when you get an expert come in with a sales pitch, it's not necessarily the correct information you need, and that's where we're quite happy to be that sounding board as well, to help you out. So the first consideration you need to know is, what shelf life does that product have? So if I have a doser sitting there, is that going to deteriorate at all? Because there's no point buying a product, putting it there going, I'm going to keep that as a spare just in case, to then have it degrade, so by the time you go to use it, it's no use to you. So that's one of the thought processes we need. The next thing we need to think about is it possible to source that item locally? Can I go down the road? Do I have a plumber that's down the road that may have that sitting on a shelf for me? So I'm not having to spend that money and keep it in my stock, but they have it there so that if I do have a problem, I can get on the phone, ring them up, get down and get whatever the item is that I need. The next step to think about is, okay, if it's not locally, can it be sourced within the district? So a prime example for me with this was last year our pump decided to fail on our leisure pool. We don't hold a pump for our leisure pool on site, purely for the reason that it's $12,000 that I don't have spare to sit up in a room upstairs. But I know down here in Invercargill, I can jump in my car, drive down, pick a pump up, which is exactly what I did. Got a phone call, my daughter was doing gymnastics, I was down here down in Invercargill, hopped in my car, drove back, worked out what the problem was, worked out it wasn't the impeller, so everything was working fine, it was just the motor itself. Got on the phone to someone I know and said, hey, I know you're not working today, do you have this pump in stock? Yes, brilliant, I'll be down in 50 minutes. So yeah, so think about, right, do I have to have it? No. Can I source it locally? If not, no. Can I source it within the district? And it's easy to get to. It's amazing when you put a phone call into somebody and they're just down the road, they'll say, actually, yeah, I'll come and grab that for you. So plant assessment. We're actually closed at the moment. Well, I say closed, we're doing spring cleaning rather than maintenance, because maintenance sounds boring. So we're doing a spring clean. And that all came about was, I'll be completely honest, the reason I jumped ship was we had an issue years ago with a power board that decided to not work properly. Nothing got done about it. That's when I went to Sport Southland, worked for Sport Southland. I've come back from Sport Southland, that same power board was still sitting there, untouched. We've just replaced that power board. Now, to give you an idea of cost increase over the period of time, there was 5 years from when that had issues to now. Back then, 5 years ago, that would have cost us $25,000 to replace. It's just cost $90,000 to replace. Something else to think about as a trust, as a group. If you delay things, if you put them off, your cost is going to increase. And not necessarily by a little bit, because when you get things like COVID that jump in, we had copper wire going up in value every 30 days. We've had steel go up in price every 30 days. Cleaning chemical costs have gone up 8% every 6 months for us in the last, pretty much since COVID hit. Every 6 months there's been an 8% increase in our chemical cost. So be aware that when you're going in and when you're looking at your asset, when you're seeing what condition it's in, you need to think about short-term, long-term, what's the potential increase. So there's a few things we need to think about when we're actually assessing our plant. First thing is, when was it purchased? If you don't know when it was purchased, a lot of pumps and that have dates of when they were actually made. That's the closest you can get to it. If not, have a rough guess ballpark of when was it put in place? Was it back in the 60s when the pool was first built? You need to then think about, okay, it was purchased here, what do they consider to be the normal life expectancy of that pump, of that piece of equipment? How long is it expected to actually live and survive? And then you need to think, we've got it in an environment that's probably not what it is best suited for, i.e. the chemical exposure that it gets. You then need to look at it and go, okay, what is its current condition? Pipes are a great example. Everyone thinks about the pumps, everyone thinks about, the dosing systems, they think about the pool tanks. They don't necessarily look at the plastic pipes or the pipes that go between things. They don't look to see whether someone's left it running with no water flowing, so it's actually weakened that pipe, bent that pipe out of shape. They haven't had a look at it to think, okay, has somebody actually been standing on it, put pressure on it, has that slightly fractured it? So you need to be pretty honest when it comes to the condition and what you believe the condition of that item is as well. Next thing to think about is the environment that it's stored in. Once again, this lovely electrical board is stored upstairs in our plant room. Through that plant room, we draw the air for our extraction system. So we've got chloramines running from our main pool hall through, and then it gets pushed out onto a roof, which goes right down on the roof. Just so happens that the access to get into that lower plant room and up onto that roof is right below where the air gets blasted out. So we've got chloramine air basically coming out, being spit onto a tin roof, then being pushed into where all your electrics are stored. Great system. Not anymore, we've changed that now. But you need to think about, okay, is it in a good place? Is it going to have its full life, or actually am I putting it under more pressure that it's going to get damaged and I'm going to have to replace it sooner than what I would think? So once we've done that, once we've thought about our critical spares, once we've had to think about the assessment of what our equipment condition is in, Then we can start going, okay, well, let's put a plan together about what we're going to do. How are we going to future-proof this lovely asset that we've been given? Like I said, a lot of the time, and this goes for sports teams, the amount of sports teams I've been in, and being president of the Gore Gymnastics Club, you get parents on board that are really keen for the period of time that their child's in that sport. Which is great, but it means you potentially only have someone with an interest for 1, 2, 3, depends how long the child keeps that interest for. When we come to planning, we need to be thinking past our time on that board. We need to be thinking long term. We need to be thinking 10, 20, 30 years. So when I came back into my role, which I'm currently in, managing the Gore Multisport Complex, the first thing I did was I did my critical spares and I started buying critical spare parts. So I have the spare parts for my chiller systems and everything else. Because we not only have the pool, but I run the maintenance side for the ice rink to keep their plant operating as well as the stadium. So I had to put a 30-year plan in place, and that's exactly what I started doing. Critical spares, started with that, started putting something in place. Then I started going through, doing an assessment on the rest of the facility. And I literally went from the front door and walked my way through to think about the doors. Do they swing open? Is there going to be damage there? Am I going to have to think about repairing that? What's the condition of the carpet or the entryway? Is that going to cause trip hazards, or is that going to cause other issues? You know, so you need to think about the accessible side of it as well. So think long term. Think, what would I like to see here for my grandkids, great grandkids in the future? Not hydro slides. For Splash Palace. Break it into key years. So have key times for what you want to do. So there's been talk of, you know, heating systems and things like that. Is that one of the goal points you want? If you're thinking of changing your heat system, have it as a designated point on your plan. You're going to work towards this year is going to be this major piece of work. Split it down to further afield. That way it's going to help with you financially as well, working towards getting that goal and achieving what you need to do plant-wise and maintenance-wise. So the shutdown that I'm doing now has taken 3 years to get to. So the initial planning started when I first came back into the industry, or back into running the pool. It's taken 3 years to put a plan in place to then achieve and do what we're currently doing at the moment. And even though you may plan that, there are always hidden gems for you. So always have a contingency. When we emptied our pool, we thought we were removing tiles, replacing a little bit of grout around those tiles we removed. As soon as we emptied the pool, we realised the grout had degraded that much that we now had to grind out the grout between every single tile in all 3 pools and then re-grout the entire lot with an epoxy grout. 4 weeks in, we're still grinding the last pool. Got 2 pools complete, but we've still got 1 pool to go. So yeah, there are always hidden treats for you. So always put a large contingency into whatever you're thinking for the future. And I think over the last couple of years we've had some really good reasons why we need to think about contingencies. When you think about COVID, the effects that that's had on us. When you think about even the war in Russia and Ukraine, and you think about the effects that that's actually having as well. There's flow-on effects for everything we do. So yeah, so be honest and give yourself a really good contingency. Look at long-term future-proofing. So even though you may go, okay, this is my major year for replacing my filters, or this is my major year for replacing pumps, or this is my major year for replacing my heat system, you need to keep analysing that. As you get closer to your goal, you need to make sure that what you had thought back year 1 and you're on year 5, is that now the best thing out there for me to use? Is that the most economical thing for me to use? If not, readjust your plan. Alright, so just think long-term future proofing. What I put in, I need to know is going to pay off further down the track. Use technology to your advantage. So I think Steve pointed out a prime technology piece of advancement with Bluff. Putting in automatic controllers. Yes, there's a big cost to it, but there's also a long-term savings for it. And that's something else to think about, that when you're planning, you need to think about not only the upfront cost, but you need to think about the long-term costs and how much that will offset and save you elsewhere. So by putting in an automatic dosing system and testing system, not only are you saving in time for the person who has to come in and test, you're saving time for the chemical balance, so you're actually potentially saving in chemicals. You're potentially saving in heating costs for actually heating that venue as well. You're potentially saving in not having to do backwash, which is a combination of all those things. So just think about what technological advantages are there out there to help me save in the future as well. And I know this is scaring people because you're starting to think, my gosh, there's a lot of dollar figures now flowing through your head. And we're a small organisation, we're a small trust, we're a small community pool.
And if we're a school pool, we've got to think of the Ministry of Education interference on those things.
Correct. Yeah.
You can have all the plans in the world, but they don't like them.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to be realistic about what you can do as well. And part of that is thinking about the ministry side, because let's be real, half the community pools we have are built on school land. And that is another implication that we have to take into consideration. And hands up, is the ministry still funding all your pools?
Oh, 5 cents.
Yeah, partially from where it used to be.
There's just no funding.
You don't even consider that.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
consider it.
So, I mean, you think back in the day, when these pools were built, when these pools were put in place, that was when the ministry was going, we need to teach kids to swim. We need to get these pools in every school in New Zealand. And then all of a sudden, the funding they had there for getting these pools in place, running these pools, we pull the mat out from underneath. That's not where our priority sits anymore. And that's why you guys are now sitting here as trust and as groups. Because the reality is they've passed it over to you to now take care of. And they give a small financial input for maintenance, but not enough to help run and keep them running.
Yeah, not for a whole season.
No. So maintenance and timing, that's an image from 2 weeks ago from what my pool started to look like as scaffolding started going up, and once again scaffolding going up created another thing we hadn't seen. We have to get structural welding put on the board because our structural engineer decided to come in and have a look around. He was the person who originally designed the pool, but he also then decided, oh, maybe I should have done this. Now, when you're walking around a pool facility and you have a designer with you going, oh, I didn't really do that right, did I? As a manager, starts giving you heart palpitations. So we're doing strengthening work at the same time, but also that's highlighted where we've got paint and chipping issues coming off. So you can have the best plan in place and it can go pear-shaped very quickly. So yeah, as much as we're opening at a certain date, I'm going to say possibly not. A little bit behind. So you need to think about the activities you have going on the pool. So for you guys as trust, it's not only the schools, it's not only the school programs run by REAP, but it's also, do you have people hiring that facility off you? What's their expectations as well? Because that's going to have an impact on them and their operation as well. So you need to think that they've also got a pressure on them. So it's not only the board that has a pressure, but it's the person hiring your facility that has a pressure too to deliver whatever they are doing within your facility. So communication is key to all those groups as you're going through. So when we looked at closing down, I started the conversation 3 years ago with iSports to say, hey look, we need to shut down. We're going to turn the power off, this is going to affect you guys. You're not going to have an ice rink. I then had a competitive swimming program going, well we've got nationals at this time. And iSports going, well we've got nationals here. Surprisingly, ice sports nationals and swimming nationals never align.
Can't understand why.
Trying to find an ideal time to fit all those groups in is quite challenging. So we had basically a 2-week window between nationals for one group finishing, nationals for the next group starting. So that's where we had to pick that time with them and say, how can we work this out with you guys? So think about those groups, start those conversations earlier. You need to think about the weather. Is the weather going to work for you? I think you said it before, Jenna, for us, that the painting of the pool, you need the right temperatures.
Well, with us, even though we'd just replaced the roof, there were a couple of leak issues.
Yep.
And they couldn't, and because rain never goes straight down, it always goes sideways. They couldn't put the lines in with the chance that it might rain in the next couple of hours because apparently the water goes onto any of that paint and it just takes colour out.
Yeah.
So that was delayed another couple of days.
So weather plays a big part. Also, just having hot and cold creates what in the building? Condensation. So if you're trying to do that work as well, condensation dripping down, there's another impact on what you're trying to do. So yeah, so thinking about weather and also it being too hot. Do painters like painting in really, really hot weather? Not great for their product either. Which the painters are facing when they have to go up that scaffolding to the top there. Normally sits at about 30 degrees. The welder up there, he's got about 4 bottles of water because every time he finishes a weld he basically drops a litre of water straight away. So it's a heat bath. I mean, putting glass right at the top and putting yourself quiet is basically living in a hothouse. What's the enthusiasm level of the workers and volunteers? Kind of key to know. Key to know what drives them. Key to know what times. I mean, we've talked about the season side of things. End of season. Who's really motivated at the end of season to keep going and get into maintenance? Jeepers, I can almost see sweats there from just recording. Yeah, so trying to pick the right time for also the enthusiasm of those people that are going to help you out. And the other thing I'd have to say as well is you really need to acknowledge those volunteers and workers for you with everything they're doing. I'm super proud of my team. There's no way that my team should have to be removing that grout. But as the Tyler turned around to me and said, we've got no other option, and my team have just jumped in, boots and all, to remove grout. To be fair, we had some contractors helping us yesterday, and I'd rather not go with them again and keep my team. There's a little bit more pride from my team than there was the contractors helping. Seasonal impacts, so we talked about lambing, timing, carving, you know, do the people have the time to actually give to help? Budgeting, oh, here's a fun subject. So when it comes to budgeting, as much as I had a budget for this project, with everything that's happened since I started planning that shutdown 3 years ago, there's a lot that's happened in 3 years. Steel price has gone up by 60% since I started doing that. Electrical wiring is up nearly 80% from where it was when I started that planning. So, as much as you have a budget in place, you need to think about how much extra can we try and get to it. And with you guys as well being a trust and having to report back to all those funders as well, how do we make that story count? And I'd have to say the biggest thing for trust and organisation is selling your story and selling your numbers. Anything else you'd say around that, selling your story and numbers to
No, it's actually critical, is that vision and that why you're there, the storytelling. And I can send some resources on that as well. Yeah.
Storytelling's huge. There's a lovely lady from Riversdale here. I'm also part of St John's. I'm actually the chair for the Hokanui area, but for some reason I got nominated on to also be the Southland rep on the South Island Trust Board, which means I wear two hats and I have to remember to take one off when I'm fighting for one and then put one on to try and position my way. Riversdale was a big part of storytelling. So I had a meeting there just the other day and it was all about storytelling, why we're doing it, who's involved, how much the community are giving, what's the $0 value, actually I'll go into that later on, but what's the $0 value that's coming from those volunteers. Often we don't mention the $0 value that is going into it, because at the end of the day that's money saved and that's money that should be input to the project. So once again, you want to be trying to plan for a 10, 20, 30 year plan financially. You don't have to do everything in year one. If your plan can live on when you've left, you've done a great job. So if you hear people are doing stuff that you put in your plan and financially working towards it, that's a win. That's what you're trying to do, that's what you're aiming to do. So these days, they're talking 30% contingency at the moment for most builds. And in fact, when I was talking to the property team from St John's, they reckon within the next month that's going to jump to 40% contingency. That's how volatile things are sitting at the moment. So once again, being realistic and thinking about what potentially are we having to think contingency-wise for it. Think about the options that we've got down here. We are very, very lucky in Southland to have a lot of amazing trust, have a lot of amazing Lions groups. I know Lions have helped out at Riversdale quite a bit. There's been some amazing groups through there. Once again, it's that communication, talking to those groups, talking to the local groups that are going to use that facility as well and how they can support and be part of it. Tim talked about how everyone wants to create their own building, have their own space, and why can't it be multi-purpose? Why can't it be multi-used? So halls, for example, great one where you can have sports clubs, arts clubs, etc. So if you've got any other attachment to your building that can be utilised as another space, that's part of that storytelling, that's part of increasing the numbers of those people that use your facility. Another good part to storytelling at the moment is wellness and well-being. How can you link it to wellness and well-being? So when the government came out and had a fund for shovel ready, I put a plan together for what I was wanting to get done, which was the ventilation unit on my place and re-roofed. Two things I wanted done. I based my entire story around the wellness and well-being for the community and how the impact of our facility improved those areas in people's lives. What's the current government doing budget-wise? What are they looking for? What story do they want to hear? Wellness and wellbeing. They call it the wellness and wellbeing budget. So we had 10 projects through Gore District Council that they were going to put forward for shovel ready. And we sat down and they ranked them from 1 to 10. Guess where mine sat?
1.
10. I know. My wellness story didn't, and it was funny, my wellness story they were trying to put into everything else, but the reality was you could see through it. What was the one thing that was picked first of all to get funding in our district? Was my project, because it was all about wellness, well-being and the community. So all these big projects they had plans for got pushed to the side. There was only the one project that came from it. So it's all about the story. It's about how you sell it to any funder. It's about how you show the numbers you get through. It's about how you show the community support. Use that in anything you're doing when you're going for funding, whether it's through lotteries, whether it's through trust, whether it's through local groups, sports groups. Talk to those people, sell your story. And to be honest, as Kiwis, we're not good at it. We do not sell ourselves well at all. Acknowledge the $0 cost. So like I say, volunteers, it's not just volunteers, but it's the trades that give the time. If I was to look at the $0 fees for Riversdale Station when we're looking at building it, I'm talking about over $100,000 in $0 advantages we're gaining. That's a great story. When you can say we can save $100,000 because of the volunteer time put into it.
It also, some funders will only fund a certain proportion of a project, say 25%. And so you can actually, your budget, if you take in that $0 time, your budget, you might only need $50,000 worth of things done, that actually in cash, but your budget's $200,000 if you put in all that time, and then that's their 25% of your project can get funded.
It's not mucking with the system, it's being honest.
Yeah.
How do you, this is probably a really dumb question, but like, how do you put in volunteer hours?
In
What
kind.
is your hourly rate?
Yeah.
Lawyers' fees.
Okay, so
We've got lots of volunteers and we just don't know how to show.
so your treasurer is doing an accountancy role, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a dollar value you can put to that?
Okay.
Yeah. If you have a truck driver giving time to, say, transport coal or whatever it may be, could you work out what the cost is on that within your local community? The reality is, and this is what we had to get across in Riversdale, the reality is that the groups that are looking at these budgets that you're putting in understand what a realistic price is to do that. So if I go forward and say, this station is going to cost me $700,000, and they go, yep, that's right, we can compare that to everywhere else in New Zealand. But my $0 value of savings is $100,000, so it's only going to cost us $600 or whatever it is. You're not deceiving people because you're actually saying what the true cost would be if you had to pay. And I think that's something we forget about quite a bit when it comes to budgeting. We quite often don't sell that side of it. We don't understand that actually there is a lot of money we put into this. You guys driving here today, who paid for that? Who could you actually charge that to for your time? So just think about all those sides of it as well. The amount of times I've heard people go, I'm just going to jump in, like Edendale, I had a gentleman come and talk to me about,
Flags.
We spoke for quite a while on disability chairs, and the subject went on and on.
Oh, yeah, the
So,
disability chair.
so we've had a good
Thank
discussion
you,
around that.
thank you.
That's all right. But that's all time that one of your committee members has put into investigating, putting towards that feasibility time of, is this viable for our community? Where does that sit? So yeah, $0 value is very important. That's the end of my presentation, but is there any other questions? Is there anything that you'd like to know that I can either honestly tell you or fudge and then go and find out some truth later on and pass it on to forward on? Quite rude. Either a boring subject or I've done a good job.
Still something out.
Martin, we can get the PowerPoint and share it as well, can't we?
Yeah. I can flick that through. Now I have done hard copies of sort of the list that I use for just writing down my contingencies. But what I'll do is I'll also email that. So I've got them out the back. I can hand them out now. But I'll email them through because my budget list is it's really simplified. I go to our accountant and she shows me this list and I go, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm a little more simple than that. So I've got just a real simple form to work out where your budgets are at, and that's what I use to try and track my work that I'm doing. So even for this shutdown, I've realised where I'm going to be and I know what I can get rid of and put into a budget later on to make sure I try and stay on track for my budget. So I can flick that through to Tim as well. It's all automatically set up, so you just need to throw numbers in and it'll calculate it for you.
I've got a wee question. So
Yeah.
we haven't done any long-term planning for replacement stuff, and I'm kind of thinking, jeepers, we probably should. But how do we figure, when is a filter going to need to be changed, or how long a pump lasts for, or
Yep.
you sort of need to know that basic if you're going to do that planning, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I mean, I'm at a slight advantage that I've been in the industry for a few years now, so I kind
Get a
of
feel
have
for
an
it.
idea. But the reality is, pumps and that, you can call up the local companies and they will let you know what the life expectancy is of them. So yeah, there's always, like I say, you can plan for everything to right to the end, but there will always be something that gets thrown at you that you don't expect. Every time I've gone in this week, I've had a new plan. My hot water cylinders blew out the other day when we went to switch them back on, so I've had to replace those. When they pulled the toilets out, every toilet bowl was fractured in the base. I've now had to replace those. The shower heads were ruptured, had to replace those. I had basically a tradesman every day for the first 3 weeks turn up with a different problem. So yeah, sorry Steve.
Yeah, so I'm just going to touch on that life expectancy side of things. It's really easy for a supplier to say this, you get 5 years out of a pump or something like that. But if you're doing your planned maintenance, it actually prolongs the life of the equipment. And it also depends, like if you talk about filters, what kind of filter you have. A steel body filter will last a lot longer, or a fiberglass wrap one might last quite a long time compared to something else. It also depends on your whether you got hot water, your chemicals, the level of. There's a whole lot of things that in the mix there. Is the outside of the vessel okay? Do I just need to replace the inside? How often should I do that? Because there's probably PVC parts in there. PVC will break down over time, so you might do the inside more than what you actually do the actual outside.
So you'd better look and sort of say, well, 10 years, or you've got to give an idea.
Visual inspections are big. Like you need to visually inspect everything, so that catches on what Steve's talking about. You can see the outside side of it.
Yeah.
But when you're talking on the internal side, that's when you see it in the pools. If you start getting sand through here, or you start seeing leaks here. So, and like Steve's pointed on, they say a pump will last for 10 years, but actually if you maintain that well, I've still got a pump that was the original pump of our building. Those pumps are supposed to last 10 to 15 years. We're 20 years on, and I still don't need to replace the pump because it's maintained.
We're in that same position. We do all our pumps every 2 years that are running all the time. And when you look at a pump, it's not just a pump. So what are the components of the pump? You've got an impeller. Impeller can come in either cast, stainless steel, or bronze. Okay, so a cast impeller will last a lot less than what a bronze impeller will, and a bronze impeller will last a lot less than what a stainless steel one will. And if you've got cavitation in the pump, so it's air going through your pump, then that's going to drop that down again as well. So there's a lot of things to factor in.
Because you've already just said things like, oh, I maintain my pump every 2 years. It's like, oh, well, we just leave ours going, and it's probably been going for the last 10 years.
We
and I
have
don't
a
think we've
budget.
ever turned it off.
Yeah, but that's
What
part
is it?
of
What do you do to maintain it?
That's part of what makes you budget, though. You need to sit down and think, right, okay, if I'm planning to replace a pump every 2 years, I need to put that cost in there.
So do the school not have a maintenance person?
So
No.
Yeah.
Do you actually turn the pump off and do something to it?
yeah, we've got a spare pump. So when it comes to critical spares, all our big main circuit pumps are the same, so we can interchange, and we've got a spare one, so it can go between the three. Ours wasn't 12 grand, it was only 6, but might be a bit smaller. But when you do your maintenance,
We've got 2 pumps on either pool as well, so because I think your sand.
sand filtration.
Yeah.
So when you do a pump maintenance every 2 years, and you could be less if you're only seasonal, it could be less, but then if you've got water sitting in your pump not circulating in the off season, that can cause just as much corrosion than what it would normally running. We just do the seals, we take it apart, we check any wear on anything, the impellers, the inside of the flutes, that sort of stuff. We clean up any corrosion and we put it back together. So you can get ceramic coatings that can actually get the pumps blasted and get it ceramic coated and put it back together. But most of your pools will have smaller pumps.
Yeah, and I'd say to add to that, so as much as I don't have critical spares of big pumps, or didn't have critical spares of big pumps, as I've taken pumps out that haven't been working right, that's when we look at them and strip them down as a spare to sit in, if they can be done, if they can be fixed up, if they can be reconned. So if you're removing a piece of equipment, just have a look and see if you can use that as a backup spare to sit there, because you've got no cost in it. But like Steve said as well, with your seasonal pools, the thing you have to be careful with, so when I managed Nayland Park Swimming Pool in Nelson, that's a seasonal pool. But you could guarantee that because it had sat dry or with water in, that also deteriorates anything that's rubber or plastic. So that's something else you have to take into consideration. So if you see a leak, don't panic straight away, because if you've got a seasonal pool, it could be as simple as replacing a rubber gusset. Could be replacing a simple O-ring. So as long as you have a plan budget there to fix any issue that could come up as well. Because quite often as small groups and as trusts, we're just thinking of that season to season cost. We don't actually try and put a little bit aside for those unknowns that crop up.
Miscellaneous on the budget.
Miscellaneous, yeah.
Miscellaneous plant expense.
We've been able to keep our pumps going over winter because if we shut them down, they seem to get more trouble. So we'll just keep them going over winter. And they're a lot smaller, obviously, the new ones. And if you do get one great year, we've got a budget for 1 year.
Yeah.
And so just throw away things there.
That's it. My heat pumps, I actually have a budget to replace a heat pump every year. I've never had to, but I have the budget there that I have to replace it every year. And that's purely there in case something goes wrong, because these days for the heat pump units we use, it's cheaper to replace than to rebuild. So that's the other thing you have to be aware of as well. Is it cheaper to just replace it than rebuild it? Because you can put a lot of money into rebuilding something and it not working properly anyway. Especially as like Steve said, if it's cavitating in there, that can ruin the alignment of not only mucking the bearings up, but it ruins everything else, the shaft, it ruins the rotor at the back as well. So you just have to weigh up what's the best option to do and try and budget the miscellaneous side of it. Yeah.
I've got a question. I don't know if it fits into your talk, maybe it's covered next or something, but I'm really interested in, it kind of does future planning for likes of safeguarding the community and safeguarding the committees that run these pools. So like, so if you've got a pool that runs by like fob holders, key holders, and you run public sessions, what's the requirement to safeguard your committee and the community, such as like policies and procedures you actually need to have, like paper policies?
So I've just had a quick discussion over here actually. Do you want to add into that?
Yeah, I just want to say that if you want to look at a standard to go with or an accreditation, you want to go down the quality pool model.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two accreditations which are held by Recreation Aotearoa, which is pool safe, and quality pool. So you'll be pool safe at Gore, we're pool safe at Space Palace. But if you're doing that sort of side of things, quality pool basically says it's an unlifeguarded pool with keys, but you've got all the health and safety policies and documents, and the people who have the keys that enter the pool sign a waiver basically to say that they're going to comply with all the health and safety requirements, blah blah blah. You've got to do an induction with them. So that's where that goes, and that's through Recreation Aotearoa. There's a small fee to get that accreditation, and there's a bit of work involved in getting the health and safety side set up and the right signage.
Yeah.
But once you've done it, it's just a rollover.
It's a maintain.
Yeah, it's an annual thing, but it just rolls over every year just to make sure that you're still up.
And there's policies on the website too, so there are documentations that you can have a look at, that you can modify that would suit your facility.